Welcome to the Pathfinder podcast, where we examine the paths of those that have gone before us and use this knowledge to smooth the process of forging our own path. This is your Uncle Salty. In today's episode, I interview Lieutenant Kaila Vento, a flight scientist at the Naval Medical Research Unit Dayton, Wright Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio. Kaila is a doctoral graduate from the Arizona State University School of Health Sciences in the Exercise and Nutritional Sciences program. Today, Kaila shares her story with the audience on how she achieved her goals of pursuing scientific research while combining those goals with military service. Kaila successfully balanced her roles as a graduate and doctoral student, wife of an active duty Naval aircrew service member, and mother of a young child. Kaila's story is a roadmap on how the pursuit of military service to the country, combined with familial support, is a formula for achieving excellence. With that said, let's hear from Kaila. I want to start off to tell the audience kind of how I came across Kaila in my travels. I was doing some work at ASU, doing some media and communications work during the Salute to Service, which happens every year the week of Veterans Day. It's a 7-day period where we celebrate different things. One of the things I came across was an interview with Kaila when she was a PhD student at ASU. Very interested in what she had to say, and I decided to look her up and see what she was doing and saw that she had gone into the Navy, and she is now a lieutenant in the Navy, which is, for all the other service people who don't know, that's an O3. In the Army, they call that a company grade officer. What do they call that in the Navy, Kaila?
I'm a staff corps officer, so I'm not on the line.
The O3 rank, I felt, was the most fun rank that I had when I was in the military, because you have enough rank where you have some authority and you're given some good missions with parameters where you get to use your critical thinking skills. But at the same time, you're a low enough rank that if you kind of screw it up, they're not going to ruin your career. But once you get into that field grade range, the margin for error is very narrow. So you got to, when you start looking at pinning on, was it lieutenant commander? Is that what the Navy is the next rank for you?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so when you pin on those gold oak leaves, then you gotta walk the line. Anyway, so let's get started, Kaila. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how that whole process went for you as a youngster and kind of moving into going to university.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm from the Milwaukee suburb area in Wisconsin. Had a very standard upbringing. I have two sisters. I have a twin sister and an older sister. We were very involved in sports, all went to 4-year universities, and we all pretty much stayed in the Wisconsin, Minnesota area. And I embarked on my undergraduate studies at Winona State University, which seemed like ages ago. I graduated from there in 2014 in bachelor's in psychology. I minored in coaching, and then I had met my husband, and he was in the Navy. And so I followed him where he was stationed, where I began my master's at California State University, Long Beach, stationed in San Diego. And I was commuting about an hour and a half or two to school. Very long. Yeah, it was a very long commute.
What did you think about the transition from what student life is, being a bachelor level student to a master's and versus a PhD?
Yeah, that very interesting transition. As a bachelor's, I only had to think about myself and just getting through the day. My master's was very different because I was brand new married and I had a baby on the way when I began my master's program on top of my husband's deployment. And when I started my PhD program, my husband had separated from the Navy, my son being a younger toddler, not an infant anymore, but the intensity of the PhD program was much more demanding. So it required a lot of effort, a lot of time, and balancing being mom, wife, PhD student was challenging, but also rewarding at the same time.
So that's got to be very challenging, trying to balance family life, having a husband deployed and pursuing a master's at the same time. How was that on you?
When you ask me, those 7 months that my husband was deployed is kind of a blur. I was in the midst of wrapping up my master's program. I was living alone in the San Diego area at that time, and our son was just 7 months old when he had left. So it was very busy. I'll give you that. A lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings, and just trying to, get through school as best as I could while still trying to apply then for those PhD programs. It was tough, but looking back at it, I'm glad I did it then because boy, I wouldn't want to be doing it now.
Yeah. How was it for your son? Did he recognize your husband when he came back? So I have kids, and my youngest was about the same age when I had deployed on my first deployment. And when I came back, he didn't recognize me at first. He was like, "Who is this guy coming in my house?" Did you run into that similar kind of a situation?
Only the first day. Only the
Yeah.
first day my son had an initial reaction because he just turned 1 and he
Mhm.
had kind of a, who is this person? But after the first day, he was fine. My husband and son bonded really well. It's as if he had never left, but that immediate greeting from being separated was a little interesting, but he gravitated really well once my husband returned.
Interesting. That's the exact same response I had. My son kind of looked at me kind of weird. It was actually less than a day where he kind of started clinging on me, and then he was clinging on me like hard after that. And I would love to know the science behind that. I mean, they talk about pheromones and all that sort of thing with, human to human communication. And I would be very curious to see how that connects, because a similar situation it's kind of fascinating. What was your master's program in again?
My master's was in kinesiology, and I
Oh,
specialized
okay.
in sport and exercise psychology.
Interesting. So when we wrap up the interview, I got some questions on that. If I forget, I'm a little bit ADD, and I
That's
bounce all
okay.
over the place. So, like when you said, "Oh, I grew up in Wisconsin," and I was like, "Oh, Packers." Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the
The,
first thought.
the shiny object, popped in front of me. I'm like, "All right, just relax, relax." So, and then your PhD program at ASU was
Exercise and Nutritional Sciences.
okay. Wow. So wow, you've got a lot going on there. That is fascinating. So I've noticed that the military is really getting much, much better in that arena as far as making sure that service members get the proper fitness and nutrition regimen and healing from injuries. My son right now, he had injured his knee doing who knows what. They're giving him therapy that back when I was in the military, they would have never considered. I mean, it's kind of cutting edge what they were telling me they're doing. That's really great that they're getting folks like you into the service, putting your expertise to work. So your husband deployed. What did he do in the military?
He was Naval aircrew. He
Oh,
deployed
okay.
twice.
Okay. And what
He,
platform was he flying in?
yeah, he was flying with C2s, COGs. They are no longer, they are retired now. They just
Okay.
retired this past fall, actually.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And what did they do? Was that like a communications or like surveillance kind of aircraft?
More like cargo,
Oh,
bringing
okay.
stuff to and from the aircraft carriers.
Okay. I think I know what you're talking about now. I remember seeing those things. Those are pretty cool.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
where was he stationed when he was you were in California? What base was he stationed at?
He was stationed in North Island for both of his deployments.
Great base. I've been there. In fact,
It's a
I think that's where I saw there. It's coming back in my memory. Those aircraft doing touch and goes. They fly right over the golf course.
yeah, probably.
Funny, I actually watched Top Gun Maverick this weekend,
It's a
which
great
supposedly takes place at Naval Air Station, North Island. I begged it. I don't know. I looked at it. I'm like, I don't recognize any of that. But that's awesome. So now you husband got out, and then you went in. How did that work?
Before we had moved to Phoenix to start the PhD program, he had separated.
Mhm.
And so that was in 2018. And that's when
Gotcha.
I embarked on the PhD journey. And
Okay.
then it wasn't too long after that I was considering either going into the DoD as a civilian
Mhm.
or going and serving. And I was a little apprehensive actually to tell him because he was very excited to be done with, the Navy, having
Sure.
his career and, doing something else and pursuing something different. So a little hesitant to tell him that I was considering it. But once I did, he was very supportive. He pushed me along to pursue it and told me that it would be one of the times of my life because the training that he and I did were very similar going through Pensacola.
Yeah, I'll bet you he gave you some really good advice too. I try not to, my son's on active duty, and I try not to like belabor him with all kinds of, tips and tricks of the, service, but I check in with him all the time, and I ask him about, things he's doing. And then I ask him, well, did your detachment sergeant do this? And he'll be like, well, yeah, actually you did. So it's kind of interesting to compare the paths that he's on and I'm on, and I'm sure you probably experienced the same thing.
Especially during training, we go through, or the position I'm in with the Navy, we also go through an abbreviated flight syllabus that's similar to the pilots. And he, being Naval aircrew, also had a very similar pathway. So it was nice to have that support when I was going through flight school, to have someone to lean on and who understood completely, because he had done it just 10 years prior than I.
Sure. And that whole egress, that's what they call it, egress, when you have to get out of the aircraft when it hits water and all that.
Oh, yes. The helo dunker. I still have some apprehension when I think about that. I have gotten into the pool since, but yes, absolutely. That was a very challenging, both physically and mentally, to get through. And it's actually, I did that training a year ago this month.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. And now I'm sure he went through the same thing, right?
Yes. And he did amazing, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he kind of calmed your nerves a bit from that.
Yeah.
My son, it's funny. I mean, I don't want to get into my story too much, but he's following kind of the same path I was on. And he went to 2 schools in the Army that I went to, the airborne course and the air assault course. I went through them way before he did, but there's a lot of the same things that you do. For instance, the air assault school, you have to tie a Swiss seat, which is kind of like a rope seat that you use for rappelling down mountains or out of a helicopter. You have to do it in less than a minute. You get 6 feet of rope and you have to perform making a Swiss seat in less than 60 seconds. And it is a no-go. If you don't do it, you're out. And it is very stressful. So he kind of lucked out on the fact that I was in his corner and giving him some pointers on how to get that Swiss seat done quick and relieve the stress associated with that. Let me back up a little bit. The one thing I want to try and do with the listeners, especially the students and veteran students here at ASU, is to understand kind of like the details around the path that you chose. Getting in a master's program, and especially getting in a PhD program, probably has a lot of hurdles you have to jump over. Tell me a little bit about that.
Either applying to a master's or a PhD program, I was applying to multiple programs across the country, not knowing where I was going to end up. Of course, you have to take the entrance exams, and sometimes you have to take those entrance exams multiple times. The amount of money that you spend, of course, taking entrance exams and the application fees also adds up. So it can be financially stressful, preparing an application, asking for letters of recommendation, and praying that you get an interview. It's a stressful time, and that happens right in the fall. And typically, when I was at least applying, I was still in school applying for those higher graduate level programs. So trying to balance my schoolwork, deployments, infant son, and hoping I get into somewhere, at least an interview. It's very stressful.
Well, we're glad that you got here to be with us in Sun Devil Land. It's a wonderful school. We have a huge veteran community at Arizona State University. I was told we have 13,000 service-connected folks attending Arizona State University. And what that means is active duty like yourself who are using tuition assistance, or people who are veterans who got out of the service, or service-connected dependents. For instance, it's different with officers who, with enlisted, they qualify for the GI Bill straight away. And I'm not an expert on this, so please don't take this as gospel. But I got the GI Bill from being deployed as an officer. That's how I got here. And we have a lot of service-connected people at Arizona State University. One of the missions of the Pathfinder podcast is to talk to people who are in the military community who are either connected to Arizona State University or are considering it, and try and help them on their path, such as the name of the Pathfinder podcast. So tell me a little bit about what your experience was like as a PhD student at Arizona State University. Did you live in the downtown area? Were you out in the valley? How was that working for you?
When we first moved to Arizona, I actually moved in with my parents.
Oh, they're here in Arizona.
Yep, my parents are there.
Oh, nice.
And so the first 6 months, my son, my dog, and my husband, we lived with my parents until we closed on our own house. And we were not living in the hustle and bustle of Phoenix or Tempe. We were more on the outskirts of Mesa. So
Okay.
certainly
So you
making
had a little bit of a commute to get into classes then.
Yeah. My classes, though, were all in the evening, typically.
Right.
So that
It's
was
interesting you say that. I'll get to it later. That one student I'm thinking of who's in kind of a similar program, I run into him during the day all the time studying, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm headed downtown at 5 o'clock or whatever." I'm like, "Wow, you got a long day." So that's interesting. I think he must be on a similar program as you were on. A little bit like it's a little stressful to, to have to move in with your folks and bring a dog and all that. Did it go smoothly, or did you have any hiccups along the way?
we had a blast. It was great being with my family because we had been separated for a couple of years, not having any family with us in San Diego. So that time with my parents, them being able to have opportunities to be with our son, it was special. And you know what? Sometimes it was a little chaotic, but we made it work. And it was also nice just having them close by once we did move into our own home for that support when I was going through school.
That's awesome. Are your folks still here in Arizona?
Yes, they are.
Well, you have an invitation anytime you come to visit them to bring your husband and meet up with me. We'll get a cup of coffee. I think I was when we did a little pre-interview talk, I was telling you about how I just had coffee with a couple of Air Force lieutenants who recently just commissioned, and
Yeah.
I meet with students every single week from different backgrounds, and I try and inspire them because I'm one of the older students on campus.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people think I'm faculty. And I try not to look like faculty. I wear the ball cap and things like that. But so I always try and help students all the time. So whenever you're here, feel free to reach out, and it'd be great to meet your husband. That'd be awesome, and your dog if you bring your dog too. I love dogs.
I'm not considering flying my pups with me. They're a lot. I'm sure they're crying now.
Right now. Yeah, forgot about that. You're a little bit further away. I was thinking you were in San Diego for some reason.
No.
Have you had any personal stories of kind of like struggle or resilience issues with your husband being deployed, or you're being away from training that you want to share?
Yeah, I would. Before I commissioned in the Navy, I had been gone for 2 summers for 10 weeks, and I didn't have my family with me. And so that was my first experience being separated from them for quite a bit of time. And I didn't go visit back and forth when I was away for those 10 weeks. So it kind of gave me a taste of what it would entail when I did commission and how long I would be gone. And the second time that I was gone for about 4 months. And
sorry, how old was your son at this point?
The first couple of times when I was gone for 10 weeks, he would have been 3 and 4.
Oh, wow.
And then when I was gone for a longer period of time, that's when I had commissioned. I started training. That was probably when he was about 5, 6.
Yep. Been there, done that. I know how that goes. That's tough on everybody.
They ended up coming with me to Pensacola, Florida when I did my flight school training. And that was awesome. That would have been really tough going there for 9 months without them. So I'm grateful that they decided to make the trip, because at first they were going to stay back into Phoenix and not come along with me.
And when you were down in Pensacola for 9 months, what type of housing did the Navy give you?
We just rented a house off base.
Cool.
Yep. I didn't want to live on base, of course. So we had rented a home very close to base that was still conducive for me to go to training, and then found a school that was also suitable for our son.
That's great. So now you're at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. Is that what it's called? I keep changing the base names. I keep losing track. Is that the name of it?
Yes.
Famous for is it John Glenn? What? There's an astronaut. My mind is not the sharp as it used to be. I know that it's famous because there was some NASA thing there.
You know, anything Air Force NASA related, that's history I'm not the best at.
I think there's a museum there for John Glenn or something like that. I can't remember. I know I drove by there one time and I saw it. So tell me a little bit about the work you're doing for the Navy now, what you can talk about. I know just even with my own experience in the military, it's not like the military is trying to keep secrets from anybody. It's just that, our ongoing work needs to be our ongoing work. But there are certain things we do tell the public. Tell us what you can tell the public.
I recently checked in to Wright Patterson Air Force Base in August of 2023. So I'm still very much a brand new lieutenant. This is my first tour. So I'm just getting my feet wet, learning how to still be an officer and a flight scientist and everything in between. But here at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, well, first I'll start that what I am. I'm an aerospace experimental psychologist. That's a really long tongue twister. Yes. Yes. So we abbreviate it as an AEP. And AEPs are flight trained naval officers who apply their expertise in human factors and the behavioral sciences towards solving human performance challenges in naval aviation, as well as across the fleet. So most of my time is spent researching in the labs, flying for applied experience, and how I can bring some of those experiences to the lab to address any challenges that may be going on within naval aviation.
Okay. And what type of research are you doing?
Most of the work that's being conducted focuses on human performance in extreme environments. And so any environmental or occupational factors that could maybe impact performance, high altitudes, hydration, some of that area is where I've been kind of dabbling the last couple of months.
So high altitude can affect, there's a couple factors going on there. You've got lower levels of oxygen and then you've got the cold. So there may be certain things you're looking at to try and improve performance with those two factors that humans in that environment have to adapt to.
One of the things is hypoxia. So that's referring basically to the physiological conditions where there is not enough supply of oxygen to body tissues and organs. And that's because of the high altitudes during flight. And in flight school, you go through hypoxia familiarization training and how to appropriately wear your mask and how to recognize symptoms of low oxygen conditions and how to utilize your emergency procedures to get you at a safer level. So
I know exactly what
that acute hypoxia.
I went through the high altitude chamber for high altitude parachuting. And they take you up to, I can't remember how high we went. It was pretty high, like 30,000 feet or something like that. And then they have you breathe it's not really air. You breathe whatever's in the chamber at that level. And then immediately you start having symptoms. They had us try and draw things. They had us try and speak. And basically your brain doesn't work very well when you're not getting the right level of oxygen.
The training has changed a little bit since then, of course.
When I'm old.
No, but it's become a little bit, I don't even know. When I was doing the hypoxia familiarization training, I was in a flight simulator and I was actually hooked up to a mask rather than in a chamber. And so I was breathing the mixture of airs just on a mask rather than being in this chamber, and then would have to recognize my symptoms in that kind of format.
Right.
So a little different.
Yeah. In my situation, we didn't have like a flight simulator. It was like a big old tank, a big tube that you went in, and you had seats, and we had masks also. And they would tell us at, what altitudes we were at periodically. And then there was a point where we had to take our mask off and try and perform some things. And then we did the emergency procedures, where you put the mask back on. There's like a high flow valve, things like that.
So that certainly has changed.
So, and then the other thing you talked about was hydration. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. It started at Arizona State. I worked in a sports nutrition lab with Dr. Flores Wardner. He is my PhD advisor. And I actually didn't choose the hydration sciences. It actually found me being in his lab. And so for all 4 years at Arizona State, I had worked with Dr. Wardner related to urine color charts, hydration and performance. And a little bit during my PhD focus, I did hydration and urinary tract health.
Interesting. You mentioned the urine color charts, and that kind of gave me a little flashback to my deployment days.
Yeah.
We had stickers inside of the we call them latrines in the Army, where it would tell you, this color means you're dehydrated and you need to take actions because of that. So that's probably based on some of the work that you guys do.
It's still being used. Absolutely. I use it. I would implement it in any hydration related research if I was doing it. it's great for hydration awareness in general, which is wonderful. And certainly they're still being used. I can remember going to officer training, and sure enough, I saw those posters on the backs of the bathroom stalls. So they're definitely being utilized.
And what about the, you mentioned urinary tract infection. It's something I saw when I was in field environments, basically where you weren't able to clean yourself as, frequently as you would like. But how does that work in an aviation scenario?
In aviation, and as well as sports, this is also common in sports or any other type of tactical environment, there is this practice known as tactical dehydration. And it's a self-induced practice to either limit or stop fluid consumption hours before a flight or your activity to reduce the urgency of needing to urinate. And in this area, it would be aviation. So to reduce it while in flight. And this, of course, this urinary retention, and if it's prolonged, has implications for urinary tract infections. And so
urinary retention means you're in the aircraft and you're not urinating. So whatever's in there is going to be stewing for quite a while, depending on how long you're in the aircraft.
Right on the money.
How can it, other than urinary tract infections, how can the hydration affect human performance with aviators?
There's a very tight window of where you should be within your hydration status or your balance. And even if you're out of range, 1 + 1 or minus, you could be at a cognitive deficit in terms of like decision making, motor skills, or situational awareness. And utilizing a technique of tactical dehydration not only has urinary complications that could be associated, but performance impairments. Just being able to have quickness or situational awareness in really timing situations could be detrimental. So it's not just an aviation thing, of course. It's with all tactical operations that hydration is key.
Right. It reminds me of a competition. I'm curious if you've seen this in your experience or with your research of cramping. So for instance, I did a competition one time. It was an extreme race where you had to do a kayak of like 8 miles and then a mountain bike. And it seemed like I carried the mountain bike more than I rode it. And then I think that was like 15 miles, and then it was a 12-mile run. And by the time I was in the run, because I was carrying the bike so much and I was dehydrated, my hands were actually cramping to where they would like close down.
Yeah, I
had to pry them open. It was the weirdest thing ever.
I've never had that experience.
You haven't seen that in your research or anything?
I just said I've never had that experience. But yeah, absolutely. The cramping, absolutely. Especially those long endurance competitions, triathlons, ultrathons, the Ironmans, absolutely.
If you were going to advise somebody who's looking at going into a master's or PhD program, what do you think you learned from your process of applying, getting approved? And then the big thing is funding your program. So for instance, a lot of veterans are using their GI Bill, but the GI Bill only goes for so long. Now, there are some really good veteran-specific scholarships available out there, but not a lot of veterans are aware of them. Did you take advantage of anything like that, or is there any tips and tricks you could give someone who's looking at trying to extend their education beyond the bachelor's program?
Boy, I wish I had commissioned after my undergraduate years to have benefited from that, because I paid for my own master's. I was fortunate enough at Arizona State that Arizona State covered me because I was a teaching associate.
Oh,
so
nice.
I was able to cover school there in exchange for teaching classes. But I did not utilize my husband's GI Bill because that was for him, and I was not going to utilize that. So I had to be strategic in finding programs that would be either in state or budgeting, or if PhD programs, whether they were offering a teaching associate position, or if the PhD advisor could cover you as a student through grant funding for research. And so I would advise students, if they're applying to master's or PhD programs, to look to see if there are teaching assistantships or associate positions, whether they're prospective academic or PhD advisor can fund them and what opportunities the graduate school specifically, not just the program, but the actual graduate school has offered for scholarships. I did apply, certainly got them, but it was a lot of work because those scholarships, you still have to put in those lengthy applications, essays. And so I would advise start early because it takes a lot of time.
Right. And how did you uncover the teaching? Was it teaching associate? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
How did you uncover those?
During my interviews, I simply asked when I was getting interviews. And so which helped me make a decision whether I was going to go pursue that program or not. So I was very upfront about funding questions during that application process time so that I hadn't put forth so much effort for a school or program that I simply couldn't afford.
That's a great pro tip. All of you veterans out there who are listening, pay attention to that one, because I've not met a student or a student veteran who's doing any teaching associate type work. So that's maybe something that we're missing. So that's a great opportunity. And what about scholarships? Did you apply for any scholarships at all?
I did. I applied through the graduate student organization. They had listed applications for certain scholarships, and they would give announcements, and it helps following them on Instagram or just checking their site through ASU, at least when I was a student. So I absolutely put in applications through them, as well as my specific college, the College of Health Solutions. I was vigilant in terms of when those announcements would go out, and I would put my applications in early for that as well.
One of the things I did for myself was researching scholarships. I'd heard about some. I went on to their social media or their websites and did some research, and a lot of them, they may not be open for application at the point in time you're looking. But what I did is I created a Word document or a Google Doc, and I put the links to those websites for the scholarships on that document. So I actually have a document of a list of scholarships that may not be open for applications at this point in time, but I can look down the road and keep checking their websites to see when they open up again. So for instance, I saw some that they don't open their scholarships up until April of this year. Mm-hmm. So I've got that on my radar, and I'm going to look at that as April approaches. So I may pursue those scholarships.
I did the exact same thing. I even put a calendar reminder to go look at those websites too on my Google spread to check back with that website or sign up for their subscriptions to get those announcements in my email as well. So we did the exact same thing, and it was super helpful.
Great minds think alike. So The last question for advice, practical advice or strategies for someone who's in a program like you are in. So I've got a fellow student. I believe his degree program is clinical exercise physiology. I think he's pursuing a master's in that. And he told me that he actually is considering going back to work for the military as a civilian, kind of like you'd mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Any advice for somebody who's pursuing maybe that route of maybe being a civilian? Do you have any advice for someone who's looking to do that?
When I was trying to navigate how I was going to get myself into a DoD or active duty sector, I did a simple Google search and I searched internship opportunities. And I can get you those links after if you want, because I can't remember off the top of my head, but I knew they exist. I knew they were DoD specific, and I ended up getting 2 of those internships. And that's how I had summers at Naval Medical Research Unit Dayton through this internship program that was DoD specific. And oftentimes they are looking to maybe even bring back those individuals who do their internship program. And I can think of the acronym NRIP. It's Naval Research Enterprise Internship Program, I believe it's called. I will double check that. But I was an intern for them 3 times with the same unit. And now I'm back at the same unit in uniform. And so I would definitely check out those DoD specific internships.
Yeah, I look forward to getting those links, and I will put them in the podcast show notes for any and all listeners who want to try and look at what that field has to offer. Last thing I would ask you is, do you have any questions of me, and I'm sure your husband probably given you a ton of advice, but one of the things I like to do with any person I interview, you know a little bit about my background. I retired from the military as an officer, and anything that I could do to help you.
You had mentioned it's the sweet time to be an O3 because you're gaining up there, but you're not quite high enough in the ranks. But my unique's different. I immediately commission as an O3. So right off the bat, it's here are all these responsibilities, but also you're a doctor. You have your PhD, so you must know what you're doing. But really, I'm a brand new officer and trying to figure it out as I go along. So what advice would you give to a brand new officer who's not necessarily the lowest ranking and, because I didn't check in, but just some helpful advice getting through the first year as an active duty, at least on tour? I know that was kind of a loaded question, but
No, it's not loaded. The first thing I always tell everyone who's in the military is lead by example. And what I mean by that is that understand what the standards are in everything you're doing and meet or exceed the standard. I'm a stickler for being on time. I've never been late for anything when I was in the military. I was always the first one, there, and I was never the last one to leave. I think that's kind of foolish just to try and burn yourself out. But I think being ready and being prepared is just a huge thing. And then maintain your fitness is a big thing. Do all the things you need to do physically for your job. Set the example for anybody, your peers, your subordinates, even your leaders. I've inspired people who are senior to me into getting into better shape based on what I was doing. And when I was a commander, I did the remedial fitness sessions all the time, unless I didn't have somebody who wasn't, on remedial. This one unit I was with, I was the commander of, and I had intelligence analysts, and they're not the most physical people in the world. They're super smart and one of the best people serving the military. Having said that, some of them were not meeting the physical standards, so I had a remedial PT program. We did regular fitness 3 times a week, and if you were on the remedial program, you did it 5 days a week. So I would work out with them 5 days a week, and I set up an incentive program for if the whole group set bars of achievement for them, and based on that, they would reduce down to 4 days a week. So always be with your sold. Well, I was Army, so I say soldier, but service members who are struggling, or even the ones who are excellent. Bring those people with you also. I had this one soldier who was just super at fitness, and I put him in charge of the fitness program, and it said, hey, I need you to inspire these folks to try and achieve your level. So that's number one, is always lead by example. Number two, from a personal, and I kind of learned this the hard way because I was never in the military as a careerist. I actually went on active duty and then left active duty fairly shortly after I went on, after a few years. It was a time period where, the budget was terrible, and, it just wasn't a fun time to be in the military. So I decided to leave. But then and if you listen to my first episode of my podcast, I explained how I went back on active duty right after 9/11. And then I was on active duty for virtually 6 years after that, and mainly deployed. So the one thing, like I said, I wasn't a careerist, but I learned about in the Navy, they call them fit reps. In the Army, they call them officer evaluation reports, and how important they are and the timing of them. In the Army, you have a seniorator, which is not your direct supervisor, but the person who supervises your direct supervisor. And they do a portion of your officer evaluation report. And what they say and what they put in their report carries a lot of weight. So if you're coming up for a promotion, so let's say you're getting ready to become a lieutenant commander, that fit rep before you are going for that promotion needs to be your best fit rep that you've ever had. So you want to show progression in your career. And then as you approach that next stage in your career, you want to achieve everything that you set out to achieve. And the one thing that we did in the Army, we did quarterly counseling, where you would sit down with your direct supervisor and they would explain, here's what I expect out of you. And then you measure throughout the year, you'd measure those achievements. So always make sure you're hitting all those achievement windows that you set with your direct supervisor. And then when it comes time for your seniorator to do their portion, they see that you've achieved everything. And then you have to communicate through your supervisor to your seniorator. You're coming up on your board for lieutenant commander, because it's important that you get a very good fit rep going into that board. You want to be able to kind of shine in that moment. Does that help?
Very fitting, as I have my first fit rep debrief this coming Monday. So very fitting.
Oh, hey, very timely.
Yes.
Well, the last thing I want to do is I want to thank you, and I want to thank your husband and your family. I've mentioned it in my previous first episode podcast, but I talk about this a lot. Less than 2% of Americans decide to put on the uniform and serve the country in the military. You and your husband have far exceeded that kind of call of duty. And it's a sacrifice going in the military. People don't realize how difficult it is. You're very gracious in explaining your time with your husband being deployed. I know how hard it is. If you get deployed, I suggest preparation and everything is the key, and talk to experts in mental health on what's the best way to approach this time away from your family. Having said that, I think with folks like you and your husband and your family supporting you, that's what makes America the greatest, freest country on this planet. And I want to thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I've been looking forward to this for the last month since we've talked about it.
And again, don't forget, you have an open invitation anytime you come back to Arizona.
I know. I need to soon.
Thanks again, Kaila, and you have a wonderful night. Thanks for staying up late with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Today we heard from United States Navy Lieutenant Kaila Vento at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. Kaila shared with the audience her story on how she navigated the pathway from undergraduate student in the Midwest to doctoral graduate at Arizona State University and on to military service as a flight scientist. If you learned something or found Kaila's story inspiring for your path, reach out to us at pathfinderpodcast@fastmail.com. Please like and subscribe to the Pathfinder podcast and share the show with all those you feel might benefit from the Pathfinder stories. This is Salty the Sun Devil coming to you from the Blaze Radio studios at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication in beautiful downtown Phoenix, Arizona. Now go find your path.